Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Go Virtual Career Pathways Conference. I'm Heather Cavazos, and I'm from the San Diego and Imperial Counties Community Colleges. And we collaborate with the County Office of Education on many initiatives, so I'm proud to help out today as a room host. I'll be your host and your moderator today. We ask that you all keep yourself muted if you can, unless otherwise during the presentation, the presenter asks for you to maybe answer some questions or give some feedback, but feel free to use the chat to ask questions if you'd like. It looks like there's a small group today, so it might be a little more informal where you can ask questions as we move through the presentation. We'll just kind of leave that up to the presenter today. So with that, I would like to introduce you to Vicki Meadows with Explore STEM. And this session is called Opening the Doors to a Career in Science by Engaging Kids Early Using Next Generation Science Standards. And with that, Vicki, I'll let you go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Heather. And thank you to the organizers. I was telling Heather, it's really impressive to see a virtual conference come together like this. And of course, thank you to all of you. I know you're very busy, and I appreciate you taking out some time to come to my presentation. So I come to this from the science side rather than the education side. As I was saying earlier, both my parents were teachers. They were music teachers, and my daughter's a teacher. She teaches at La Jolla Elementary. And then my youngest daughter's actually still in school. I have one of those big age differences. So I've been around education, but really have been a career scientist for 30 years. And was inspired to move into education, in part because of my older daughter and my younger daughter. We started Explore STEM with a grant from the National Science Foundation about a year ago, and we built the application. I was saying we were in the process of launching it on Friday, March 13th, the day the global pandemic was declared. So that threw a little bit of a wrench into it, and we're sort of relaunching now. Where I'll just put out there that we are looking for a few teachers program before our next grant is due. We have piloted with some homeschools, but not in the public schools. So today the presentation's divided into sort of three parts. The first part is coming at it from my role as a scientist and how I use the scientific method really kind of in day-to-day work, and I give some examples. And then we'll move into the next generation science standards, which I think nicely mirror how we do science in the professional or in the real world or whatever, and kind of bring those together. And then we'll see how we brought all that experience together and built Explore STEM. And I'll try and speak, from a high level so that you can learn something from it, in addition to see how we implemented it ourselves. And the other aspect that we will refer to is really engaging kids early. And it's really pretty interesting. Just the one conference we attended, it was a homeschool conference. And we had a little toy, if I have time, I'll show it to you, a little spinning top centrifuge that we built for kids. And the kids were just running to our booth and playing with this centrifuge. And the parents were just terrified of us. They said, we don't like science, it's boring, we dread teaching it. Whereas the kids didn't have those kind of preconceived notions and were super excited to be in learning about science, asking lots of questions. So I will say that I did upload the slides to the conference website, and they're also available at this URL. So with that, I'll get started. I think I have to change over here. So we're starting with a quote: "No great discovery was ever made without a bold guess," by Isaac Newton. And I love this quote because it is the center of science. I think there's this notion that your hypothesis is this big, scary thing, and you have to really think about it. It has to be just perfect, but it's really nothing more than a bold guess. And that's certainly how we approach it. And of course, you've all heard of Isaac Newton. Just a little aside, that's pertinent to the current times is that Isaac Newton had this so-called year of wonder, which was 1666. And this was during the bubonic plague in London when Cambridge was closed. And he isolated himself out in a house, out in the country, away from everybody. And, you know, there was no TV or Zoom or anything. And he was obviously bored. And he did a lot of his most notable work during this year. He invented calculus. As shown in this slide, he found that white light is composed of all of these many colors. The apple fell on his head, and he got his, you know, his work with gravity and laws of motion. All was done during this year when he was isolated away because of the plague. So, you know, the two lessons are good things can come from this. We can learn new things, and it does come to an end, and it will come to an end at some point. But in the meantime, we can move on and talk about some science. So as I said, I'm going to start by giving you some examples of how we use the scientific method as scientists, just in doing everyday things. So I started out working in big pharmaceutical companies. My first, you know, job as a scientist was at Abbott Labs. And I'm a bench scientist. I have a PhD in chemistry. But one of my programs was building this robot. And it's a first robot of its kind. And I have a little video that shows, and what the robot did was it took a sample from boiling liquid nitrogen, you know, which is very cold, and mounted it in this cold stream of nitrogen. And you had to do it, you know, while keeping the sample frozen and everything. And so it was this huge project with 5 or 6 engineers and scientists on it. And so, of course, a project like this has hundreds and hundreds of hypotheses. But the specific example was, so you can see the probe was very, very cold. When we first started out, we had this idea that we could use a tool that morphed into this to transport the sample from the nitrogen onto the nitrogen stream. And I was with the engineer, and I was pretending to be the robot. And I took the first sample and I put it on, and yes, it worked great. And then I went to get the second sample, and he says, okay, you can put the sample on. And I'm like, it's stuck. And it was stuck. It was like glue. We were just laughing. I was lifting it up. There was no way that probe was coming out of the sample container in the liquid nitrogen. And I remember the engineer said, we couldn't figure out what was going on. And he said, well, do you think that maybe it's water from the air has accumulated on it and it's frozen and it's gluing it in? So, you know, that was a bold guess. And we didn't really have to do any research because we already knew that. But so he made that hypothesis, and he told me to leave and come back in a few weeks. And he had built a little drying chamber. So then we parked the probe in the drying chamber and then put it in the liquid nitrogen and mounted, and it worked beautifully. And so we tested our hypothesis, or his hypothesis, and solve that problem. And that's kind of how I think about using hypothesis, kind of even in making robotics, where you might not think that's the case, in kind of a real world situation. So the next example is, we're kind of fast forward way ahead. I started a small company, Zenobia Therapeutics. I still do some work there for other people mostly, but I wrote a lot of grants. And I have several grants from Michael J. Fox Foundation, NIH, National Institutes of Health. I have a small one from CERN. Of course, NSF is for Explore STEM. And in the picture here is when we were in Washington. Michael J. Fox Foundation asked some of the awardees to go and help them lobby Congress. And I actually put this picture up because it shows that even if you're a scientist, you don't have to be at the bench working. You know, there are scientists who are full-time out lobbying Congress, you know, asking for funding or various initiatives for science. And so that's kind of up for that. But if we think about how the scientific method used in writing grants, well, this is kind of a very big high level approach to the scientific method, where maybe you have an idea. I think if I do this, I can help, move forward research to find a treatment for Parkinson's disease. And so you have an idea, but then you have to go do research, and if I'm looking for finding a drug, so I have to look at the chemistry, I have to look at the biology, I have to look at the method that I'm using. It's what I'm proposing, has it ever been done before? So now we have a second step. We have the hypothesis, we have research, and then, here we write the proposal, we get it back, and then we do the experiments to prove or disprove our hypothesis. So this is a very high level approach and very big approach to using the scientific method. And then the last experiment I ran last week for a friend of mine. And she has a small company, she's trying to get started, and she's found a peptide that causes wounds to heal fast. And it's very expensive to make. It's just, she told me she can't really move the project forward because it's too expensive. And so I had a hypothesis that I could make this protein for her from just a crude material, and I can make it very inexpensively. And then our hypothesis was that the peptide from that crude material would behave the same as her peptide. So we've only done step one. We've shown that I can make the peptide from the crude material. Now we'll test it to see if it actually accelerates wound healing. And so it's still the same process, hypothesis. I had to go do a lot of research about how the peptide's been made before, what is it, to help design the experiment. But this is really almost a business application of science, where we already know that you can make the peptide, we already know it works, and we're trying to find a more economical way to make it. So that's really kind of three very different approaches to using the scientific method kind of in the real world, so to speak. So it's really, in my mind, it's kind of an iterative process. So you start with your hypothesis, and then you go do research, and you learn more, and you improve your hypothesis, because your hypothesis is really nothing more than a guess based on the information that you know. So you go through this iterative cycle, then you do an experiment, and you have your conclusion. And this is really central to how we approach what I think of as a science experience for students using Explore STEM. They start with a bold guess. We lead them through research. They use that to improve their hypothesis, and then go do an experiment. So the next piece of this is the next generation science standards, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I'm going to go through them briefly so I can tie them in with what we're doing. As I submitted my grant, and I actually spoke to a lot of teachers at all different levels, from elementary through college, to get input on how to build this program. And they all said, you really need to follow the standards. And I was a little bit intimidated, since I'm a scientist, not an educator, but was happy to see that they were written with scientists in collaboration with educators. So I completely understood the approach and the terminology, and it fit very well with my ideas of teaching science. So I'm a fan of these. And as you know, it's divided into sort of three pieces: the practices, which in my mind is just the scientific method, and then the standards, which are these core ideas. And what I really like, and what we embraced, is this notion that you map the same standard from elementary all the way through high school. And I like how it continues to build so that kids, can learn more and more as they grow. And then the cross-cutting concepts seem to just fall out. And of course we highlight those, but our main focus is really the core ideas and using the scientific method to experience science. So we present Explore STEM as units, and the units are divided into chapters. And so if we trace the standard, there's the elementary, middle, and high school chapters. And it's really right now the elementary chapter that we're looking for people who are interested in piloting this, or just sitting down with me and looking at it and giving me feedback. I would love that. I have my email scattered throughout the presentation, but yeah, so that's how it's organized. So there are a number of standards that this traces, but one of them is this life science standard, 1A, structure and function. And so, for example, in the elementary, and so the theme of the chapter is your understanding where the energy of our food comes from. It comes from the sun, and then how we process that food through digestion. So the structure and function at the elementary level, it's all kind of what you can see. You know, plants have leaves and stems and roots, and that helps change sunlight into food. And animals and people, you know, have mouths and hands and feet, and maybe you talk about the stomach. And then in middle school, you start to learn, okay, there are organs, and there's a digestive system, and you learn a little bit more about that. And then in high school, you learn that those organs have specific DNA that makes specific proteins like trypsin, which is shown here. And it's a digestive enzyme down in the pancreas. And actually the lab that the high school students do is they isolate trypsin from cow pancreas. And I figured out a way that they can do it in just 2 steps. It's very simple, very safe. We don't use any, no strong acids. We use, you know, weak acid and fingernail polish remover basically to do it. And then they can watch the trypsin digest milk. You add the trypsin, you know, to like powdered milk, and it chews up the cloudy casein that makes the milk cloudy, casein protein. So that's an example. And then another example is the physical science side, which is kind of more the chemistry. And here, you know, again, in elementary, there are molecules, you know, they don't know they're molecules. There are things that are too small to be seen, but we know we're there. You know, so the leaves are green because of chlorophyll, and we know chlorophyll's there. In middle school, we actually are focused on the gallbladder of all things, and cholesterol, because it's about molecules. So the kids crystallize cholesterol, and we add in some powdered bile, which from gallbladders of cows. And they make little gallstones, because that's what gallstones largely are, is cholesterol and bile salts. And then in high school, again, they're still focused on larger macromolecules like enzymes, and how those are important in breaking down the food and in digestion. And when we were building this, we were talking to homeschool as well, and we thought this was something that a family could do together, and then they can get together and share the results. And of course, maybe this is a blessing in disguise with the pandemic and Zoom, you know, where now, you know, kids in different schools or even within the same school, different grades, could all come together and talk about the science and kind of reinforce their learnings across grade levels. So to take a little short detour, this is one of our favorite quotes by Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman in space. Kids that live up or down to our expectations, we must let them know through our actions and behavior that we expect them to do science, raise the bar high. And we believe in that, and we believe in introducing big science words early, because if kids can say Tyrannosaurus Rex, they should be able to say chlorophyll. And they may not understand exactly what chlorophyll is, but we can introduce it. And so this is a way that we introduce chlorophyll at the elementary level. So so with our program, I think I mentioned we have activity books that go with it. And there's a lot of art and different types of things. So this is an art activity that introduces kids to molecules. So they don't have to know, you know, what it is or why it looks like this or how it works. They just know it's a small molecule that can't be seen. We know it's there because it makes plants green, and it helps change air and sunlight into energy through photosynthesis. And then we do like the old color by numbers, except we're coloring by atom. And it's just so hopefully when the elementary school kids start learning about molecules in middle school, they're not so intimidated by the concept because they've colored it, you know, when they were a kid. I'll do a little advertising for our YouTube channel. I'm not going to take time to play the video. You can go to the channel and it's also available. But we do have a basic vocabulary that we include. We don't just focus just on the core ideas because I think kids need to know the basic science vocabulary, and we introduce it early. So this is our word of the day, and this is about atoms. And we have little jokes, you know, atoms make up everything, you can't trust them, and, you know, have some fun with it. And we have a little science ranger, Zoe, who's the daughter of our director of customer relations. And, you know, she comes in and talks to me. She's 4. She talks to me about atoms, and she's made a model of an atom with little pom-poms, and she calls them her neutrons. And, you know, they don't know exactly what it is, but at least maybe the words aren't so scary, as I said. So we're not going to play the video. Oops. And this is just our Facebook, where we also post a lot of videos. Every Tuesday, I'm doing Nobel Prizes through the years. Yesterday we did 1903, where the first woman won, Marie Curie. And we have a lot of activities as well as just fun motivational quotes, just fun Friday videos and things. So I'd encourage you to follow us on Facebook. And then just to kind of come back to the standards, we do summarize all of the standards for you if you use our program. This is this elementary school. You know, we say K through 6. We talk about molecules, so there's some advanced concepts. And everything's mapped. I'm not going to really go into the details of this. The essential question is all of our programs start out with a hypothesis video. So they observe a phenomenon in a video and they have to make a bold guess. And then of course they go do research and improve that hypothesis. So this is kind of the bold guess. We ask it in much simpler terms. And in this case, it's not required, but this case it does actually map to a specific standard. And I'm sure you're familiar with this website, the Next Generation Science Standard website. It's really, once you figure out how to use it, it's very, very useful. And so I use this to do all of the mapping. And I also have just a printout that I read through. But I am kind of a science nerd, so I just really enjoy reading the standards. So let's move on to Explore STEM. So I have another quote now from Marie Curie. As I said yesterday, we talked about her. She's the only person, male or female, who's won the Nobel Prize twice in 2 different disciplines. So she won for physics in 1903. She shared it with her husband and someone else, and then she won it all on her own in 1911 in chemistry. And she says, a scientist in his lab is not a mere technician. He's also a child confronting natural phenomena that impress him as though they were fairy tales. And I really like this quote because it reminds me of when I was a kid and how I thought science was really magical. And it makes me think about the kids that came to our booth, you know, the one day we had it up, who were just asking all kinds of questions, and you know, they didn't understand yet that science was intimidating, and it was almost magical to them, even how that little centrifuge worked. And that's really what we're trying to instill and make it fun for everyone, the teachers too, parents, kids. As I said, we originally founded with the idea of addressing inequities in science education. You know, some schools have experienced scientists like me teaching science. Some schools that falls on, you know, the homeroom teacher who may not be a scientist by training. And some schools have a lot of money to put into science and buy expensive equipment, and some schools don't. And so we wanted to really kind of level the playing field. So it's completely independent study. It doesn't require a science teacher in the room. And because of this, we were also talking to homeschool because that's an unmet need in science education, but it's also something that should be able to be implemented even as just as an add-on activity, not necessarily curriculum, in any classroom. It doesn't have to be a science classroom. It had to have a hands-on lab because I think kids learn with their hands, and that was some of the feedback we got from the community college, that they wanted to see kids come in with hands-on lab experience. And it had to use reagents that are safe to use in your kitchen. You know, I mentioned my oldest daughter's a teacher. Well, my youngest she's in 5th grade this year. And I wanted experiments that she could do in our kitchen that I felt safe. And I can tell you that there are kids out there that have toxic reagents in toxic amounts. We're going to make a video at some point about how to figure that out. So we only use safe reagents. And then I mentioned low-cost equipment that we invented here. Our first is this little centrifuge that we'll talk about at the end. But we really wanted it to be accessible to everyone. So this is just to remind you. So we start with a hypothesis, then we go and do some research, improve our hypothesis, do the experiment, and then the conclusion is really like a lab report. And we also have a little multiple choice assessment that they do. So we call it Explore STEM Academy. It's a web application. So you just put in the URL and you're ready to go. It's, can be run on any platform because of that. And we also have a lab kit that comes with it. And this is just, again, it's pretty common things, but we wanted to make it really easy. And so we just package up the kit and send it. There's also a little patch. The kids get like a badge that they can sew on something for doing, we call them science rangers, for doing the activity. And in addition to the online portion and the hands-on lab, we also have an activity book. And so the idea is that they do their online work and then they do an activity in the activity book. And again, that could be anything: art, history, puzzles, the coloring, to reinforce what they learned. We also teach them all the math that they'll need. So for example, in this particular lab, they grow grass, and every day they come and measure their grass, and we teach them how to measure and how to graph, so that it's completely self-contained. Because we understood, especially in the homeschool, that one of the things that holds kids back from science is that they don't have the math knowledge to do the experiments or analyze the data. Because of the pandemic, we simplified a little bit, and we made a couple of standalone activity books that run through basically all of the steps, but it's all within a self-contained book. And we have one called Viruses and Soap, and it's all about how washing your hands keeps you from getting sick. And we're actually have an open promotion now where we're giving this experiment away for free. And the experiment is entirely self-contained. And they basically use oil to model the virus. They rub the oil on their hands, and then they test, does water wash it off better than soap and water? And there's writing prompts for their lab report. We have a little presentation at the end. They go and present to the CDC the best way, to keep themselves safe, and to keep other people safe based upon the experiment they ran. And like I said, it's a self-contained lesson. On the website, you can upgrade to the full lesson that takes them through the hypothesis, and it takes them through, soap is made of fat, and viruses are surrounded by a protective layer of fat, and the fat in the soap dissolves viruses, and that's why soap and water is good. And they keep updating their hypothesis, like I said. We also have a standards document. And so if there's we're charging for this because we need to recoup some of our money, but if there's anybody here that would like this, you can just email me and we'll send it to you for free for taking some time out of your busy day to attend this talk. We do have a YouTube premiering today along this topic. This is Science Ranger Zoe doing the experiment, and we watch her do the experiment, and then I also give some commentary about the science. So again, we really try and put resources on the YouTube channel that will complement our program that's entirely free and open for teachers, students, kids to watch. So that'll be coming out today after I finish my talk. This is another approach we're taking. This is towards homeschool, but I think probably it could be done as, you wouldn't want to do it in your classroom right now because it uses candy, but it's something kids can do at home. And again, we're just trying to get everybody comfortable with molecules. Molecules can be scary, so they're going to build a molecule out of candy. So they build this molecule of caproic acid, and again, we have creative writing and everything involved, and we talk about how caproic acid is what makes cheese stinky, and what would you name it, and lots of little activities besides just building the actual molecule. And that's also available now. And we're going to be doing some, YouTubes and stuff about this too. We haven't done that yet. So moving into the application at the very end, I think this is my last quote from Maria Mitchell. She was an astronomer in the early 1800s. She discovered a comet. It's called Miss Mitchell's Comet. And that, of course, was before Nobel Prizes, but she actually, I think she was accepted into the Royal Academy of Science. She was given a number of science awards. So she was really, like Marie Curie, a very impressive woman. And I like her quote as well, but she says, "We especially need imagination in science. It's not all mathematics nor all logic, but it's somewhat beauty and poetry." And we agree with that. I think I mentioned my parents were both teachers. They were music teachers. So I was surrounded by music and art my entire life and still managed to become a scientist. And so we try to bring all of this together because, we say science rangers are well-rounded people. And we include, a lot of extras because of that. The hands-on experiments that are included to kind of along this vein is they reproduce historic scientific discoveries. So this elementary chapter that I keep referring to, as I said, the kids grow grass, over the course of like 7 days or something. They measure it, water it, and they give it different amounts of water, basically the different containers, and then they see, it demonstrates that water is important, and they quantitate that by graphing. And then at the end, they harvest their grass and isolate the chlorophyll. And it's reproducing this experiment from 1818. I found actually a picture of the original article in French and translated it. And by today's standards, it's a pretty easy read. Certainly the teachers will be able to read it. There's not a lot of scientific jargon because it hadn't been invented yet. So it's pretty plain English. The title of the paper is on the green matter of leaves. And the last sentence of the paper is, "We propose to give it the name chlorophyll." And so this gives rise to a lot of activities. While the grass is growing, the kids, come in and water their grass, measure their grass, and then they go and do activities. And a lot of them are history, where they're looking at 1818. The scientists here grew up, during the French Revolution in France. They couldn't go to school because Napoleon closed all the schools. And, there's a lot of things that kids can relate to. And, pretend you discovered it. What would you call it? They called it chlorophyll. You can name it anything you want. So that's kind of our approach to the experiments. So now I'm just going to show you the application and how we chose to implement this, the scientific method. So so this is the homepage for the students. And all the pages, everything has a little kind of welcome video. I think this might even show a little bit of the welcome video.
Rangers, let's get started.
I say let's get started.
Ready to solve a mystery? Let's learn how using the scientific method.
So, you know, we have all these little cartoon videos and we lead them through step by step what they're going to be doing in each step. Everything's accompanied by a famous piece of classical music, again, just to enrich it a little bit more in the arts. And that comes from my background. And then they begin working through the different steps. So they start with their hypothesis. So when they click on hypothesis, if they have other hypotheses, they'll all be listed here. But if there are no, this is for the assessment, but it looks very similar. If they haven't put in a hypothesis, they can do begin. And then on the hypothesis page, so we introduce the hypothesis through a video. And the hypothesis video is related to the core ideas they're going to be learning, and also an introduction to the experiment. In some cases, it might be directly related to the experiment, like for the trypsin experiment. But in this case, we're really trying to relate. I'll play a little bit of it.
Don't you love playing outside on a warm, sunny day? But all that running around can make you hot and thirsty. And when you're hot and thirsty, there's nothing better than a cold glass of milk. Or maybe the entire bottle.
And then we go on and we say, you know, there's a connection between the milk you drink and the sun. What could that be? So then that's what they need to make a hypothesis. And since this is for the younger kids, we use the rest of the video and kind of lead them through, you know, there's no right or wrong answer, just your best guess, and you're going to do research, and don't worry, you can come back and change it. And you know, it's interesting, we had some of the homeschool testing we did were with public school teachers who were doing it at home with their kids. And they were getting nervous too. And, you know, we were telling them you're not supposed to put stress on yourself. It's supposed to be fun. There's no right or wrong answers. Scientists make mistakes all the time. Certainly I have. So anyways, after they do the hypothesis, then they move into research. And the way we decided to do the research section is we divide it up into little sections that will give them clues of how to make a better hypothesis. And instead of having them watch videos or read a bunch of stuff, we just ask them questions. And the purpose of going through the questions is to think about what the answers are and really work to understand it. It's not any type of a test, you know, where they would get graded. And I think I show, so now, you know, this is the structures and parts. So we ask a question. If they click and the answer isn't right, they get a hint, and they keep getting hints until they get the right answer. And then we give them a little more information. And so here we're back to the theme is chlorophyll today, you know, about how leaves are green because they have chlorophyll, which takes energy from the sun and converts it to food. The next one. So then they'll go through all the steps of research and they keep refining their hypothesis. Which to me is something that's, you know, in common with what certainly I do as a scientist. And then we move into the lab. And as I mentioned, the lab is divided into different parts. So we always have the start here video, which is a little cartoony thing that introduces them to what they're going to be doing. And then since they're recreating a historic discovery, they learn a little bit about the history. And in this case, they get to read the paper. And then we give an overview of what they're going to be doing. So here's where we tested it in the lab. So we have 4 containers, and we really worked out how much water to add each day so that you get a nice differential across the different containers. You know, being a mom myself, safety is very important to me. So we do have a safety training. Like I said, everything we use is safe to use in the home, but we want to teach kids a healthy respect for chemicals And so it's really kind of fun. You know, it's not too serious, but we have a video, we have some guidelines based on American Chemical Society, and then they take a really kind of fun safety quiz that we suggest they pass before they move on and do the actual lab. And then this is the protocol page. So this is a long experiment, a very long experiment by our standards. But most of these days, the grass is growing. About day 7, 8, the grass is fully grown, and then they harvest it and isolate their chlorophyll. So most of these days, they're just watering and measuring and doing activities in their activity pack. Every page also just has a how to use the page, you know, technical video that my husband made. But you can see, you know, on the lab plate, there's supplies that they need. I accidentally started over. And then you go through the protocol. We have little videos that help them know, you know, how to do the step of the protocol. There's a place in there where they can expand, and we have them enter in observations, like it's an electronic lab notebook. And then this is the report, where we go through all the vocabulary that they learned during the experiment, the materials, then it lists all their observations that they wrote during the course, and then we lead them through the lab report where we just ask them a bunch of questions. And then this gets all rolled up into a PDF at the end. And then we have a little assessment, but I'm not going through that. I'm not going to go through this, but there's also a whole teacher backend where you can monitor your students. You can see how you're doing. There's a messaging center. We have different resources. This is something I'd love to have feedback from teachers on, of how useful this is, and if there are changes they would like to see. And of course, if you piloted this, we would just set everything up for you. So I think I have a few minutes left. This is the little centrifuge I was talking about. So as I said, we're also inventing equipment that kids can use. So this is a little, it's made like an old-fashioned top, but inside we have a little place where you can put these little tubes. We call them centrifuge tubes to do experiments. And the kids use this in particular when they make the trypsin, because we precipitate out the trypsin as a way to isolate it, and you have to centrifuge to separate that. But I'll just play a little bit of it. So I'm almost out of time. But you see, you put the samples in, and then you spin it just like a toy top. And this is my daughter playing with it. And it actually works pretty well. It gets to about 100 times G, which is enough to separate out, you know, precipitate and separate things. This is a little science ranger, Zoe, who, you know, she likes to do things in style. And let's see, towards the end, you see it spins pretty well. And then it does eventually stop. And then you get these separations. You know, here I just separated something with 2 different densities. And you can see it separates pretty well. And again, this is all about our goal of just making science fun and accessible to kids, rather than having them work with, you know, a scary looking centrifuge that you can't afford anyways. Let's work with something, you know, simple like this that can also be a toy. And we're hoping that we get to release this beginning of next year. I think we're going to do a Kickstarter. The whole project got put on hold because of the pandemic. The person I was working with who's going to manufacture this on scale is shut down. So we will be revisiting this. That's part of why we didn't release the trypsin chapter yet. And this is just our website. You can get most information at our website. We have the confection chemistry on here now, and the free experiment, this silly video of me and my daughter. And so I'll just wrap up. I do have the little certificate thing at the end. So we have a couple of books available. Again, you know, if you would like these, you can email me. You know, encourage you to follow us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. We are looking for people to pilot the Academy. You can email me. And then just a little saying, you know, just encouraging kids that it's okay to make mistakes and messes and not know the answer, at least from the point of view of being a scientist, because science is all about trying to find the answers and making mistakes and making messes and having fun doing it. And this is just a picture of my daughter and I. We did a Medium article thing together. So with that, I'll stop and maybe there's a few minutes for questions.
Thank you, Vicki. This is Heather Cavazos. I'm your host, and I just wanted to, Vicki, if you don't mind putting up the certificate slide.
Oh, right.
Well,
Sorry.
yeah, no problem. No problem. We just had one comment in the chat from Suzanne Shearer. I love that idea of taking an experiment from the past and reproducing it today. This could become a really cool integrated project across curriculum.
Okay, thank you. And if you had ideas or wanted to discuss it with me, we welcome input, especially from teachers, because I'm still learning myself.
If anybody else has any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself or enter it in the chat. Otherwise, I have posted the link to the evaluation form in the chat. If you could please make sure to fill out the evaluation at some point today, that would be so helpful. We can stay on just for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. Thank you, Vicki. What a great presentation.
Thank you. And I'll probably be at the happy, I don't know how the happy hour is going to work, but I'll probably be at the happy hour tonight. And again, I would love any input or ideas that people have on the program.
It looks like Susanna is asking, can we purchase the spinner centrifuge?
Right now, I can say that if you'd like one, you can contact me. We're not producing them at scale yet because our manufacturers closed. We do plan to offer that in the winter when we can produce it at scale. But I do have a few that I've 3D printed that we can talk about how you could get one.
Thank you, Suzanne. She said, awesome, thank you. Norma said, thank you. We have just about a few more people still on. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll hang out for a few more minutes.